question? Yeah. GDP? Yeah, actually that's what I was going to do, is kind of review that stuff. So perfect. Perfect tee up, since we didn't get to do it intensively like usual, so I thought we'd start with a good review of that. And it just rolls, it continues to roll on, so yeah, that's perfect. All right, well, so here is our economy that we're trying to explain. So part of the objective of macroeconomics is to see if it makes sense to add up a bunch of people's individual behavior. You know, does that inform us of something on how we can make the world a better place? Whether that's through different types of government policy, do we rely more on pushing people to act freely on their own, or is it better to have some things ran by the government, so to speak, for various reasons? So the macroeconomy, the performance of the whole nation itself is what we're really trying to tackle here in macroeconomics. And so we have what I call the 3 biggies that I want you to memorize. 3 biggies for macro. And that's kind of what you started last week with a couple of them, and then we're going to continue on. So number 1 on the biggie list is that we'd like there to be increasing real GDP. And we're going to take a little more time to go through that. I just kind of want to list these out. Maybe I'll make a few comments. But increasing real GDP. This is economic growth. And so when we look at real GDP, we've filtered out inflation. So this is focusing in on the quantities of goods and services that we have in the nation. So the focus here is really the quantity of goods and services of the nation. More beer, more pizza, more chicken wings, more education, more healthcare, more of everything. Now, why would we want that? Some people might be kind of poo-poo, oh, economics, you're too materialistic thinking about things that you want. Why would we kind of have to have, it would be pretty miserable actually, and is for countries that don't experience increasing if it was actually decreasing. What's one of the reasons we want it to be growing? What's happening to the population? It's going up. So if we kept the level of beer, pizza, and chicken wings constant, but yet we had population going up, there would be less things per person. So don't be poo-poo on economic growth. We would want that just at a minimum to maintain some level of prosperity in material things. Now, as you learned in that chapter last week, GDP's got some shortcomings too. Economists don't just focus in on the material things, but it's a pretty important aspect, especially for poor countries where that might make up a large fraction of the food and basic needs, as opposed to the United States where it's the number of iPhone 11s or something like that, right? So there's a lot going on there in it. So I'm going to put on here too, if population is growing, then we need increasing real GDP to maintain consumption levels. Consumption levels per person. So that was another statistic that you got introduced to that we'll continue to look at as well, and that is per capita real GDP, or per capita GDP, depending on if we're nominal or real. So this is per capita GDP. That could be real or nominal. Per capita means per person. Income. If the income of the nation is $23 trillion and we have 330 million people, then we can calculate our per capita GDP. So for example, if we take GDP divided by the population for the US, then we would take whatever it is, I'm just making up a number here, it's going to be in the close, but we got $34 trillion worth of income divided by the population of the United States at 330 million people. That gives us per capita, I won't even do the math because I'm kind of just making up those numbers anyway. Should turn out to be around 60,000 bucks per person on average. And so then that'll be a statistic that we would follow. And it also allows us to compare it to Guatemala. So I just got back from Guatemala yesterday, and the per capita income in Guatemala might be around $23,000 per person. In the United States, it's $60,000 per person. So that kind of begs the question, why does America look like this and Guatemala look like this, right? And so that's what we're doing here with these biggies, is hopefully we can get informed about things that can be done to make the world a better place. Okay, any questions or comments there? So biggie number one is increasing real GDP. We hope that policymakers are thinking about increasing real GDP. From this picture, it helps us see the marketplace from, again, a 30,000-foot view, where we've got the households. This is what we care about in society. We got families and old people and young people and babies, and so the households is kind of the economic problem of trying to satisfy unlimited wants with limited resources. So the nation has land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship at its disposal, the basic resources. And how is that going to be transformed into things that are useful and make us happy, right? So how many beer, pizza, and chicken wings, weapons of mass destruction, health care, adult diapers, you name it, how does that stuff get determined, right? Do we push it to the individuals, or do we push it towards an elite group of smart people in Washington, D.C. to make those decisions? That's kind of at the heart of the matter with macroeconomic policy and looking at things that way. So these guys go to the store to buy beer, pizza, and chicken wings. So that was our consumption. So our GDP, I guess I'll continue on this level a little bit here because I wanted to add a few more things. So GDP was equal to cigarettes. C plus I plus G plus X. So last week you learned about cigarettes. I don't think it was framed that way in the textbook, but I want you to memorize cigarettes. It's all about smoking. So what are we doing here? We're breaking consumption, or consumption in this case, into four major components. Consumption is households buying final goods and services. It makes up about 70% of the nation's output. So the beer, pizza, chicken wings, household stuff is about 70%. And then our other category is going to be investment. And investment is businesses that are going to be buying machines and equipment and tractors and other things to run their business. So these guys over here are buying some equipment and machines, basically focused in on this capital, land, labor, capital, entrepreneurship. What are they buying in terms of things that are going to be there for a while? Expanding their business, buildings, other things. It also included new construction, brand new homes that are going to fall into that category of investment. Our next category is government spending, which is going to be 20 to 25%. That is the government buying weapons of mass destruction, roads and bridges, healthcare, transfer payments, all the spending that the government does. Now, if you're doing your math, 70 plus 20 plus 25, that'd be 90, so even 70 plus 15 is 85, 105. These numbers tend to be above 100%. How could that be? What did we learn about exports last week? Net exports. Are they positive or negative?
It depends on how much you import.
Yes, and so for the United States, if these are the historical numbers, what has the United States had here, a negative number or positive number for the last 40 plus years? Tim? Negative, right? So that's our trade deficit that we talked about in the first week, where the United States is importing more from the rest of the world than we're exporting, right? So we're buying more product from the rest of the world than what we're exporting. And so this is going to make up the difference here, maybe negative 5% to 10% is the exports of the nation. All right, so that's our cigarettes category. Again, it's kind of a government accounting thing that's going on. This was called the expenditure approach. So the expenditure approach to measuring GDP was to simply add up all of the spending that's done in the nation. All right. So that's our flows with our major markets here. So we've got beer, pizza, and chicken wings being exchanged in the final goods market, the spending market, if you will, the expenditure market. And then we have the purchases of land, labor, capital entrepreneurship, the resources of the economy being purchased in the resource market. And so when these guys make a paycheck to these guys for the labor that they put in that month, if somebody earns a $2,000 paycheck, that is income coming to them. What do they do with that income? Spend it. They come up here and spend it. And so the reason why we have two approaches to GDP is that it turns out the income of the nation ends up being equal to the spending of the nation. The income and spending end up being very, very close enough for us in this class for you guys to just memorize that GDP for the nation is either the income of the nation or it's also the spending of dollars on final goods and services. So GDP, gross domestic product, is the dollar value of all final goods and services produced within a nation's boundaries over the course of a year is the definition for gross domestic product. The dollar value of all final goods and services produced within the nation's boundaries over the course of the year. So it is then, if spending equals income, it's also the income of the nation, right? So income of the nation, spending of the nation end up being one and the same. So we'll put another dot up here. So GDP also is, I'll put the little squiggly equal sign. It means approximately equal to the income of the nation. So we had the income approach. The income approach you guys did last week was to add up all incomes. So the income approach was to add all income of the citizens of the United States. And as you learn, those two things turn out to be two different ways of getting at the same problem. Okay, so on this picture, before I go to the next one, it also highlights for us how the government gets money. So the government gets money through what's called coercion or force. They take the money by force. I know that sounds a little bit weird, but I really want it to stick with you that it's totally different than the market system where you choose to buy what you want to buy. But the level of weapons of mass destruction and healthcare and other things are forced upon you through a democratic process, but nonetheless, you can't mince words with this. It is through force, not choice, at least if we look through the lens of everybody. So through the use of force, the government collects taxes at the cash register, and it also collects some income tax. So there's money flowing into the government to be used, hopefully, for great things that make us all a better place, right? But nonetheless, it is not an individual choice is the important part to think about. So what does the government do with their money? They go buy weapons of mass destruction from hopefully a US company over here called Guns R Us, right? And so they go spend money on that and other things. So they're going to the resource market is the point to buy things to run the government. When Joe Biden runs out of toilet paper at the White House, the government cuts a check to Walmart and buys some toilet paper, right? So Joe Biden's going to in a sense, going to Walmart for toilet paper just like we do, right? And so that's part of the government spending in the goods market. The government also needs somebody to scrub that toilet. So somebody works for the White House, and that person is not working for a private company, but rather working for the White House. And so that person's labor, the resource of labor, is being diverted to the White House instead of a private company. And so that person gets a paycheck, and of course that paycheck then has some taxes taken out because they don't get to avoid taxes either, and so they goes back up to the White House. All right, and then the last one here was the Robin Hood stuff that we'll spend more time on. We saw it in the early chapters too. Medicare, Medicaid, social safety net programs, unemployment, food stamps, healthcare. The idea here, corporate welfare, giving money for green energy, windmills and other things. If the government's taking money from somebody and giving it to somebody else, we call it a transfer payment, right? Take from somebody, give to somebody else. That's different fundamentally than building a bridge or buying weapons of mass destruction, right? So we want to identify that differently as the transfer payment. Okay, yeah, Tim?
What's G2?
What's what?
G2.
G2. This was just our spending for the person who's scrubbing the toilet at the White House. So it's spending on resources, spending on these resources down here. A laptop for Joe Biden, right? So that laptop is a capital that would have or could have possibly come over here, but instead it's a purchase by the White House. It's falling into this category instead of like this category or possibly this category. So as long as I brought up a laptop, I think that's kind of important. So you guys buying a laptop to, I don't know, write letters to your friends and email and stay in tune with Facebook and social media, not using it necessarily for school or anything, that laptop, exact same model, size, everything, would be consumption for the nation. A business buying that laptop for their sales force to be used for the sales team would fall into the investment category. Joe Biden buying it to keep track of all the important stuff that's going on around the nation would fall into the G category. And finally, that laptop could be exported somewhere around the world. So the same exact model of laptop could potentially fall into any of those categories, depending on who bought it and what its ultimate use was for. Okay? All right, any other questions? All right, so here's our cigarettes, a little more laid out in its fundamental categories. So we've got households doing the consumption, that's our 70%. Investment is business, kind of B2B is kind of the lingo nowadays, business to business purchases, right? So one business is buying from another business. So this kind of goes to the output market, but it loops back. Government spending, the White House coming in here and buying from Guns R Us. And then finally, possibly China or other countries, the rest of the world buying stuff. So we've just kind of partitioned the sales of U.S. businesses, if you want to think about it that way, into those four categories. From there, they have to pay a paycheck and other forms of income, rent, interest, profits, all kinds of income of the nation. So our shorthand notation here is y equals c plus I plus g plus x. And then, but what these guys actually get to spend is that taxes are taken out of their paycheck. So we had our gross income versus our net income. Gross income, net income, income after taxes. So we had that coming out, and then that's ultimately what we get to determine where we spend our money on. All right, any questions on that picture? All right, and then finally, I want to give you at least a little glimmer of the full plate of spaghetti. This is where we're heading in the class, not so much this week. A little bit this week, though. We'll touch on some of this. But this is our 30,000-foot view that I kind of want you guys to be comfortable with. Here's all the C plus I plus G plus X stuff. But then I added the financial markets. The financial markets are global, right? So a German who wants to invest wants to, they might like German stuff, but they might want to diversify their portfolio and buy some American investments as well. So they're making this kind of risk-reward trade-off. And the saying is that capital or investing tends to roam the globe for the best rate of return. So it's very much an international type of thing when we get into the financial markets. Same thing applies for Americans. So they might not have bought all beer, pizza, and chicken wings and some Toyotas from Japan, right? So here's our level of imports, stuff that you guys buy that actually came from another nation. Here's the stuff that you purchased from the United States, from US domestic producers. But now here you can save part of your money for future years. And so you put your savings into the financial market. And so on net, the United States is a net saver. You guys are probably net borrowers at this point in your life. You're taking out some student loans to keep up with your spending in hopes that you'll make more money in the future to pay off those student loans and start to save. Well, there's good news. Not everybody's a net borrower in the United States. That would be bad news. So there's more savers than borrowers. So there is money flowing to financial markets, which then helps fund our primary borrower, businesses. So businesses tend to borrow money. A new entrepreneur comes up with some new whiz-bang idea that's gonna, make all of our lives a little bit better, but they don't have $10 billion laying around to start it. That's probably a little heavy for a startup, right? But they don't have millions of dollars, and so they get some lending maybe from banks and other places. Where did the banks get that money from? They got it from people who are saving. And so the financial markets act as an intermediary between borrowers and lenders. And so we'll touch on that more as we move through the course. But that's kind of our full plate of spaghetti of various components of the overall macro marketplace. Okay, questions or comments there? All right, let's get this out of the way. That was all for biggie number one. Tim, you asked the question. Now that I've gone through that with GDP, is there any last GDP related stuff that you have a question on?
In the way there was a formula for GDP, the income approach.
Oh shoot, I should have kept that thing open. The formula was to add, I kind of just did it shorthand here. The formula was to add up individual paychecks for people that just have work, and small business income, and basically all the types of income. So that's all that formula was adding, it was what I said here, but I just said it kind of globally. We're going to add up all of the income of the individuals. Okay, anybody else? Okay, so that was biggie number one. Biggie number two is we want policymakers to be thinking about having low and stable inflation. Low and stable inflation. Okay, so inflation is a change in the average level of prices. So inflation, which I'm using the pi symbol now. Apologize, it's profits in micro class, but it's macro, it's pi here. So inflation is the percentage change in the average level of prices. The percentage change in the average level of prices. So again, in last week's material, so I'm not going to cover it super heavily here, but we learned how to create a price index. So the price level, which I'm going to use the notation PL. The price level is an index number that reflects the average level of prices. So we have the consumer price index is one of those. That's probably the most popular one, the CPI. So when you hear in the newspaper that the economy is experiencing, 4.2% inflation or something, they're usually reflecting the consumer price index. And so the consumer price index was the basket, 80,000 products or goods and services. Let me put goods and services somewhere. 80,000 goods and services of consumer basket. So you can think about a consumer going shopping. This is our consumer with our cigarettes. The spending that they do over the course of the time is the largest fraction of GDP. What are they buying? Beer, pizza, chicken wings, utilities, electricity, gas, rent, all the purchases that the average kind of normal human being here in the United States would be buying is what they're trying to reflect. And so they gather the prices of a basket of goods. So you remember the basket, hopefully from last week. There's a lot more than 80,000 goods and services, which is kind of hard to believe, but they're going to measure the 80,000 goods and services to come up with the index number. All right, we also had the GDP deflator. The GDP deflator is the other index. I'll just put index here. The GDP deflator index and it uses GDP. Parentheses, all goods and services, not just a basket of 80,000, but everything else. And so the price level number for, let's say, 2022 was equal to the nominal GDP over the real GDP. And this would be for 22 and 22. So that was the formula to calculate this index. What the index does is it bases prices off of a particular year called the base year. So note, a base year is chosen to base inflation off of. A base year is chosen to base inflation off of. So for example, if 2018 is the base year, then real GDP for 2018 is equal to nominal GDP for 18. So we're just picking 2018 to base all other numbers off of. And so then if we look at what would be the base year for 28, or the price level for 2018, that's where we get our 100 from. So nominal GDP for 18 divided by real GDP for 18 would be like maybe 24 trillion divided by 24 trillion. And in fact, let me just put, I'll put that down just for an example. 21 trillion divided by 21 trillion equals 1. And then to make it, I don't know if this is honestly easier or not, but somebody didn't like to deal with decimals apparently back in the day. So to change it into the price level index, we multiply it by 100. So again, this is 1, right? Which is 1.00. We're going to move the decimal place over 2 spots. And so the price level in our base year is 100. So therefore, the base year price level is always equal to 100. Okay, so now if we have, in the future, if we have some inflation, prices are going up. So let me put on here kind of what the key issue is. The income for the nation, nominal GDP, nominal means the current year's GDP. So nominal GDP for 22 is equal to the price of good 1 in 22 times the quantity of good 1 in 22 plus the price of good 2 in 22 times the quantity of good 2 in 22, dot, 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 all the way up to the millions of goods and services. So it's the price of beer times the quantity of beer in 22 tells us all the beer, the dollar value of beer in the United States. The price of chicken wings times the quantity of chicken wings tells us the value of chicken wings over the whole year, plus the value of everything else. So the shorthand notation for this is to use the little summation operator that you might remember from math class way back when, and say that this is good I in 22 times the quantity of the ith good from I equaling 1, the first beer and chicken wing, all the way up to N goods in the economy. So this formula up here, which could string on for 1,000,000 miles, is condensed into this little short little guy. All right, questions or comments on that? Remember that from math class way back when? All right, how can GDP go up from year to year? By looking at this equation. How can GDP increase? What's biggie number one? Biggie number one is what? Increasing our GDP, real GDP. But this is actually nominal GDP, so I'm trying to highlight one of the problems that we had last week. How can this go up next year, the nominal GDP, where we're using 22 prices? There's only two ways this can go up. What could go up to make it go up? Quantity, yes, that's right. So quantity goes up, and maybe this one stays the constant, or this one goes up more than this one goes up, or this one goes up and this one goes down. But basically the quantity effect is bigger than the price effect. The second way it could go up, though, is just the opposite. Prices could go up. So we could have prices of beer and pizza and chicken wings doubling, but the quantity of beer, pizza, and chicken wings staying the same. Would that be good for the economy? If all the prices doubled, but the quantity stayed the same in 23, would that be good? No. Did we have any real thing good come out of that? No, because the good part is having more beer and pizza and chicken wings. So what we've highlighted here is that it's the quantity part we care about. So for economic growth, that's the key variable. Economic growth needs this to grow. This growing is inflation. Inflation does not help us flourish all by itself. So what we did with this inflation stuff is we figured out a way to filter it out. Filter out the price effect and the quantity effect through creating these indices. So our big formula here that's I'm still flowing from some concept here. This one, this formula here is coming from adjusting for prices. So we're going to hold prices fixed in the base year, and real GDP for 22, real GDP for 22 is equal to, I'm sorry, I wanted to do one step first. The price level for 22 is equal to the nominal GDP. I'm rewriting what I did over there, over the real GDP of 22. And if this equaled 1.18, which is a price level of 118, what was the inflation rate from 2018 to 2022? You guys are still tracking with me here. The base year was 2018. What was the inflation rate from 2018 to 2022? How much did prices go up by over that time frame from 2018 to 2022? 18%. 18%, very good. All right, so 18%. So the inflation rate, inflation from 2018 to 2022 is equal to the new number minus the old number divided by the old number. That's our basic formula for calculating the rate of change, in this case the price level. And so it makes it real easy to use the base year as our starting place. So this is 118 minus 100 divided by 100 gives us 18%. So prices have gone up 18% over time. Okay, so any questions there? All right, so I started this whole thing off with the biggie. To summarize up the biggie, is we want low and stable inflation. So low and stable inflation, 18% is probably a bit high over a 4-year period, right? That'd be averaging out to be a little over 4%, 4.5% or something. So that might be high relative to at least the United States goals. So low and stable inflation, let's put on here Y low and stable for a goal. All right, let's talk about stability for a second. What allows you to be a better consumer, better in terms of being responsible with your money? If gas prices one day were $8 a gallon, and then they were $3 a gallon, and then they're $9 a gallon, and then they were $5 a gallon. Like each day, it just seemed kind of crazy that gas prices went up all the time, as opposed to gas prices basically over day-to-day, week-to-week being the same. Which one allows you to plan better as a consumer? Volatile prices or stable prices? Stable, right? So just kind of think of it that way, of why that's valuable for society to have stability in the pricing. So why is low and stable a goal? So we want prices stable so that we can make better decisions. So if we put two graphs side by side, and this one is at 3% inflation, and we're measuring time, and we're measuring inflation, measuring time. So let's say this is at 3%. If this one averaged 3%, so the green line, if we took the average of the green line, the average would be 3%. With this one over here, it's just 3% flat over that time frame. We're saying that this one would be preferred to the green line, right? So having some stability would be better than volatility in the prices. The low part is also key, so that we don't have to do a lot of additional math as well. So why low? We want prices low. We want low inflation because it is easier to plan for the future and do the math for next year. So, for example, if the price of a hamburger, the price of a burger is $1 in 22, what's the price of a burger going to be next year? Well, if the price of the burger in a 2% inflation world, so with inflation equal to 2%, then the price of the hamburger is in 23 $1.03. And so you're kind of thinking to yourself, 3 cents? 3 cents isn't that big of a deal, right? It didn't impact my life greatly on how many hamburgers I can plan for, my general consumption over the years. But if inflation was 20% or 40%, let's go 40% like Argentina. So if inflation was 40%, then the price of the hamburger in 23 is $1.40. And it just adds a little bit like, oh, 40 cents, that's kind of a lot. And is my paycheck going to keep up with that or not, right? It makes it a little bit tougher to make some planning decisions over time. All right, so that is kind of a wrap for those 2 biggies, mostly a review of last week. And then tomorrow, our third biggie is unemployment. We'll pick up there tomorrow.